philosophy has a very long and rich history, and there's lots of different types of philosophy. When someone says philosophy, I mean, what do they even mean? Do we mean religion? Do we mean the philosophy of the ivory towers of the university and the complicated logic and syllogisms of Aristotle and Plato, etc.? What do we mean by philosophy? Well, in my philosophy courses, my interest is in exploring things that are directly applicable to our everyday lives, especially in the time and culture in which we live, because we live in a unique time and place. What's going on right now in the world and the culture that we are experiencing right now in the world, especially due to things like technology and the internet and how the world's getting much smaller, it's much different than things were for human beings thousands of years ago, let alone 50 or 100 years ago. Things have been changing rapidly. And the biology of human beings, though, hasn't changed in some 200,000 years. Science tells us that current Homo sapiens, Homo erectus, whatever the most modern, newest form of human that we haven't really changed at all in 1 or 200,000 years, except for culture has been changing rapidly and technology has been changing our culture extremely rapidly at an accelerated rate. I mean, we've only had the internet for some 20 or 30 years. We have only had smartphones for some 10 or 20 years. These are very, very recent changes, and things that are changing our behaviors, our attention. A lot of our attention is being now taken up by media, by consuming content like television, like the internet, like reading, and probably a lot of that stuff. Hopefully, like this course is educational, useful, very valuable content. But of course, we know that most of it is not. A lot of our attention, basically, we are being consumed by the information itself. It takes up a lot of our time. A lot of it is mindless, and we can see some of the manifestations of that in the real world by who we are electing to powerful positions in government, by how low the voter rates are currently, especially in the United States, where I'm from. We're at record low voting turnout. That doesn't mean that things are all bad, but things are changing. And a lot of people, despite the fact that actually research shows pretty much across the board that violent crime is going down, that the number of wars and the scale of wars is going down. It may not seem this way because of the media and because of basically the 99% of the news is showing the 1% negative things that go on in the world. It seems as if the sky is falling and everything is terrible. It's causing us to feel distressed. People have a lot of anxiety when in fact the reality is pretty much the exact opposite. So that's one big thing that you have to understand. When we talk about philosophy, we talk about being a modern human being, we have to recognize the perspective in which we are understanding reality, the culture in which we're embedded, and we're going to talk about what we can do to, avoid a lot of this negativity and to be happier. I mean, these things are causing a lot of psychological problems for the masses, but there are solutions to these problems, and the solutions to these problems mostly lie in philosophy, how we think, how we perceive reality, and in psychology. So that's what we're going to talk about in this course. Great philosophers have been teaching us really similar things for thousands of years. I mean, a lot of the stuff that Plato and Aristotle back in Greece and Lao Tzu in ancient China is really, really similar to what a lot of modern philosophers, people of the 19th and 20th century, like Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and all kinds of other thinkers from all different cultures, all different times in history have thought, have taught, and the things that they've come up with after deep, deep analysis, a lot of it is very, very similar and overlaps. So I think that's it gives it a lot of validity. It's very, very valuable and useful, and very, of course, very interesting that these great thinkers from the Middle East, from the Far East, from the West have come up with some very, very similar and overlapping realizations. And we can, of course, utilize these and help our apply them to our own lives and help ourselves become more peaceful and happier. So there's this great common thread running through the teaching of philosophers throughout time and culture. We're going to go over that throughout the course. And this common thread can be thought of as a sort of universal set of laws or truths. I mean, Jesus and Buddha came to very similar realizations. You know, Lao Tzu and Confucius and the Stoics of Rome and Greece, they came to a lot of very, very similar realizations. Now, fundamental religious scholars and people that are really sparsing what was said in different texts, like the Quran, the Bible, etc., the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu text, they may say, well, actually, these things totally disagree, and there are some very fundamental differences. The actual founders of those religions, who, by the way, weren't trying to found a religion in many cases, they were just teaching, and what they were teaching was so profound that the followers were like, oh my God, they were awestruck by it. And then, of course, over time, their teachings became a religion. And a lot of the stuff in these religions, you know, was never ever mentioned at all by the people that were supposed to be the founders. That's one interesting thing to always keep in mind. But in this course, we're going to explore some of the most poignant and most useful of these truths. I'm not going to be focusing on a lot of big philosophical jargon that you would have at universities. There's no tests. This is not about, you know, knowing a lot of intricate little details of how to do little logic puzzles, things that are not applicable to everyday life. We want to know how to improve ourselves, how to be happier, how to have a better life, how to think in ways that are more optimal. And there are a lot of things that we can do to make ourselves be healthier, be happier, and have overall better well-being. We pretty much know now, if we just take the time to look at what has been passed down to us from great thinkers, and of course we have a lot of great thinkers that are living today, and if we kind of survey the landscape of philosophy, and a lot of them might be musicians, they might be doctors. I mean, a lot of wisdom comes from all different walks of life. It doesn't have to be a philosopher. It doesn't have to be a religious teacher. It could be any type of a writer, any kind of a type of a teacher, any profession. I mean, we're all human beings and we all have insights to share. So that's one of the basic truths that we want to realize, that we should be able to learn from anywhere. It doesn't matter if we're learning from a child or we're learning from a great scholar. There are truths out there in the world, and if we are open to them, if we can perceive them, then we can get value and insights from our everyday lives, and we need to be open to that. So this course will attempt to explain how we can apply these truths to our everyday lives, and through the application of these truths to our everyday lives over time, we can all learn to be healthier, happier, more calm, and more generous without the worry and anxiety that is rampant in modern society. And the statistics here are really startling. It shows, you know, the increase in anxiety and suicide and depression, despite the fact that we are, in general, more affluent than ever before in the history of the world. And a lot of people right now, especially like in the U.S., there's a growing gap economically between the haves and the have-nots or whatever. But if you look at things from a sort of objective point of view, the average American actually has a lot more wealth than we had in the 1950s or 60s, despite the fact that it doesn't feel that way. And we'll get into more of the reasons for that. But one of the reasons is because we just consume a lot more. We consume a lot more now than we did 1 or 2 generations ago. For example, the average size of a house or apartment in the 50s was approximately half of what it is now. So we may feel that prices are going up, rent's going up, we can't afford things that we used to be able to afford. In fact, if you look at the things that we used to consume, we're consuming much more food now. We're consuming much more real estate. We're consuming more of everything. I mean, we didn't even have smartphones or mobile phones or video games back then. And so all these things that we feel like we can't afford, I mean, we didn't buy them back then. You probably consumed things like, you had a deck of cards, you played lots of games, you might have had some board games, and yes, there was television and movies, but you had a couple channels, and you didn't consume 6 or 10 hours a day of television like we do now. So there's lots of things that when you look at it side by side, we are actually far more affluent, more wealthy than we were back then, but it doesn't always feel like it for various reasons that we're going to talk about throughout this course. And finally, for this introduction to the course, just a very simple quote: where fear is, happiness is not. Very simple, but there's a lot of fear in society right now. There's fear of war, there's fear of the other political party, there's fear of what people will think about us, fear of criticism. There's a lot of fear in society right now, and it's just so sad and so ironic, like what I just said about how we have more resources than ever before on average. Now that may not feel true for you. We pretty much have control more or less of our destiny to a larger degree than we ever have before in human history, and yet we don't feel like it. We don't feel happier than we used to be, and a lot of that has to do with the dissolution of the family. It has to do with a lot of these cultural factors. But we're going to look at throughout this course what some of the greatest philosophers and thinkers throughout time had to say to teach us how to live a good life, how to live a happy life, and how we can integrate those ideas right now into our everyday lives and improve ourselves. So this course is geared towards applying these truths to the 21st century, to the problems that we seem to be struggling with most right now in the present time. So thank you guys for joining the course. I hope you get a lot out of it. And with that, we will get straight to it.